The first time Virex saw the bruise, it was the size of a compressed nutrient pod and colored a deep, unpleasant purple. It stretched along the inside of Walter Granger's forearm, blooming like a failed dermal graft. Virex's thin, translucent eye membranes quivered, then appears. Painful, Virex said, halting mid-step in the corridor of the Interstellar Cultural Exchange Academy. The hallway buzzed with overhead light fixtures and distant chatter from other students, but Virex's attention locked onto the discoloration. Walter looked down. Oh, yeah, that. Just another day being clumsy. Virex tilted its head slightly to the left, a gesture of confusion in its species. Clumsy cost? That? Walter shrugged, shifting the weight of his book bag to his other shoulder. Tripped over a chair leg in the lounge, smacked into the corner of a table. Happens. You require medical assistance, Virex said quickly, beginning to scan the hallway for a faculty member or med drone. Walter raised a hand. It's fine. I iced it. No break, just a bruise. I've had worse. Wes? Walter chuckled and resumed walking toward the lecture hall. Trust me, this is nothing. Virex followed silently, its forelegs moving in rhythmic, anxious steps. It had read about human fragility, but seeing it up close, seeing Walter so nonchalant about what looked like internal bleeding, was deeply unsettling. In the weeks that followed, Virex began keeping a quiet tally: a scraped knee after a low-gravity basketball match, a split lip from slipping on a spilled protein gel in the cafeteria, a twisted ankle after tripping over his own shoelace. Each time, Walter offered the same explanation in various forms, just clumsy. And each time, Virex grew more concerned. By the third week, Virex gathered enough courage to bring it up again, this time in the communal study chamber, where Walter had just dropped into a chair with a grunt, wincing as he adjusted his left leg. Is that a limp? Walter looked up from his tablet. Yeah. I missed a step on the dorm stairs, landed weird. Hurt like hell, but no swelling, just sore. You are accumulating injuries at an unsustainable rate, Virex said, its voice low. Have you considered a neural imbalance? Perhaps your inner ear is misfiring, affecting coordination. Walter laughed, then winced and rubbed his thigh. I appreciate the concern, Virex, but seriously? I've always been like this. I'm just accident-prone. It's not a medical condition. But your species is not regeneratively inclined. You bruise, you bleed, you fracture. Why are you not in constant medical oversight? Walter leaned back, setting the tablet aside. Because most of it's not serious enough to need it. I mean, if I think I broke something, I go get it checked. But for bruises and bumps, we just live with it. Virex stared at him for several seconds. This does not seem wise. It's just how we are, kind of like how your species can regrow soft tissue in under 2 days. We can't do that, so we just tough it out. Virex didn't respond. Instead, it pulled up Walter's academic file on its wrist pad and began reviewing the human's class schedule, extracurriculars, and daily logs. Perhaps, Virex thought, it could find a pattern. Maybe even prevent the next incident. 3 days later, the incident happened anyway. Walter was helping set up a cultural exhibit in the main atrium. He was lifting one end of a support beam while another student, a lanky Malkari named Fintra, secured it on the other side. Walter shifted his footing, the beam tilted slightly, and Walter lost his grip. The beam swung down, clipped his shoulder, and knocked him flat on the floor. Virex was across the atrium and reached him within seconds. Do not move, it said, kneeling beside him. You may have torn a ligament. Walter groaned and propped himself up on his elbow. Nah, shoulder just got smacked. Hurts, but I can move it. Moving it may worsen the damage, Virex warned. A med drone arrived and hovered above them, scanning Walter's shoulder. A minute later, it chimed and displayed the results. No fracture, the drone said. Soft tissue bruising, moderate contusion. Walter grimaced as he sat up. Told you. I'll throw some ice on it. You cannot continue this pattern, Virex said. You are becoming a statistical anomaly. Walter smiled tiredly. Yeah, well, I've been that since high school. Later that evening, Virex sat in the dorm lounge, poring over human injury data. It calculated that at Walter's current pace, he would sustain over 60 minor injuries by the end of the academic cycle. No species, Virex reasoned, should consider that normal. The next morning, Walter arrived at class with a stiff shoulder and a visible limp. Virex didn't say anything at first, but at the end of the lecture, it approached him quietly. I have compiled a preventative strategy, Virex said, handing him a small list. It includes avoiding known hazardous areas on campus, switching to softer footwear, and installing proximity sensors on your personal belongings. Walter raised an eyebrow. You made me a safety checklist? I am concerned. Walter read through the list. You listed avoid all stairs. You have fallen on stairs 3 times this month. Walter sighed, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. All right, I'll try a few things. But you gotta understand, this isn't new. I've always been like this. My mom used to say I was born with 2 left feet. Virex paused. You were genetically malformed? No, it's a figure of speech. It means I trip a lot. Virex blinked. Ah. That weekend, Walter tried to follow the list. He didn't take the stairs. He avoided the athletic courts. He kept to carpeted hallways. And for 2 whole days, he remained injury-free. Then, he tripped over a power cable in the library and slammed his elbow into a study table. Virex found him icing it in the lounge, his jaw tense. You are frustrated, Virex observed. Walter didn't look up. I'm trying. Really. Sometimes my body doesn't listen to my brain. You are not defective. Walter chuckled bitterly. Thanks. That means a lot coming from someone who can scale walls with bare feet. Virex was silent for a moment. Would it help if I created a custom support harness? Something to stabilize your movements? Walter looked at him, surprised. You'd do that? I'd prefer to avoid witnessing your internal hemorrhaging again. Walter smiled faintly. Yeah, let's give it a shot. The harness was bulky and awkward at first, but Virex adjusted it daily based on Walter's feedback. Within a week, Walter's center of gravity improved. He still had moments like when he leaned too far forward and nearly toppled during a lab experiment, but Virex was always nearby, ready to steady him. But the real test came 2 weeks later, during the interspecies simulation exercise. Students were assigned to navigate an obstacle course designed to mimic conditions on a recently discovered moon. Walter's team was third to go. The course was littered with uneven terrain, steep inclines, and narrow paths. Walter hesitated at the starting line. You don't have to do this, Virex said. Walter adjusted the harness. Yeah, I kinda do. The first half of the course went smoothly. He moved slower than others, but he was steady. Then came a narrow balance beam over a shallow water trench. Walter took 1 step, then another. Halfway across, his foot slipped. He fell hard, catching himself on the edge with his arm, but his leg twisted beneath him. He didn't scream, but his face turned pale as he pulled himself up and limped to the end. Virex was waiting, visibly distressed. You are injured. Feels like I tore something, Walter said through clenched teeth. The med-drone scanned him and confirmed a strained ligament in his ankle. Recovery time, 2 to 4 weeks, with rest and physical therapy. Walter was put on crutches. He attended class, slower but undeterred. Virex insisted on accompanying him everywhere. One afternoon, while they sat in the courtyard, Walter looked at the alien beside him. You know, I've had friends my whole life, but no one's ever tried this hard to keep me from falling. Virex tilted its head. Is that not the purpose of companionship? Walter smiled. Maybe, but you're the first one who made me a checklist. I will continue to do so. Walter leaned back, propping his crutches beside him. Then I guess I'll keep trying not to break anything. As long as you understand that your safety is no longer subject to your personal philosophy of just clumsy. Walter laughed. Deal. Virex stood by the hydroponic wall in the east atrium, carefully pruning back a curling strand of thorn root with a pair of sterilized cutters. The plant resisted briefly, then snapped free, curling like a tightening coil before going limp. A shadow crossed the light-dappled floor tiles. "You've got a minute?" Walter's voice was softer than usual, missing the usual buoyancy. Virex placed the cutters into the disinfectant tray. "Yes." "Is it your ankle?" Walter shook his head. He was without the crutches now, but his gait still had a hitch. "No, sort of the opposite. I'm cleared for mobility again." At a favorable. Virex turned fully to face him. "You appear dissatisfied." Walter scratched under the strap of his shoulder harness. "The rehab specialist said I should take up swimming. Less impact. Strengthened stabilizers. Figured it couldn't hurt." "You require aquatic instruction?" "I know how to swim. I just don't have gear. And the academy pool has that no foreign fabric rule, so I can't use my old trunks." Virex considered. "I can fabricate swimwear using approved synthetics. I will need to examine the academy's textile database." Walter smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks. You're kind of incredible, you know that? I am functionally organized." Walter sat on the low bench near the nutrient tanks and leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Listen, I've been thinking about the whole way I am." Virex remained still. "I used to joke about it," Walter continued, eyes on the floor. "But after that fall on the moon course, I started wondering if there's something off. Not just coordination-wise. Maybe neurologically. Maybe something in the cerebellum, or... You have undergone neural scans during your admission medicals. Abnormalities would have been logged." "I know. But those were basic. My dad used to say I had directional dyslexia, couldn't tell left from right unless I looked at my hands. Maybe there's something in that." Virex stepped closer. "Would you prefer I request a comprehensive diagnostic review?" Walter hesitated. "I don't know. I mean, what if it says I'm just clumsy? That it's not a condition, it's just me. Would confirmation of that upset you?" "I think it already does." Virex sat beside him, careful not to disturb the irrigation channels behind the bench. "I have observed that your species often attaches identity to dysfunction. This is confusing. If your locomotion is impaired, correcting it should not diminish your personhood." Walter gave a dry laugh. "Try telling that to a middle school gym teacher." I do not understand." "Exactly." There was a long pause as the irrigation system cycled, the soft hiss of mist venting into the root channels. "I made it through the first week here thinking I was doing all right," Walter said eventually. "Then I caught my reflection after a seminar and realized my whole hip was blue. Didn't even remember how. I'd gotten so used to it I didn't notice." "That is not optimal." "No, but it's familiar." Virex tapped its wrist pad. "I am scheduling a consult with medical diagnostics. They may refer you to a neuromotor specialist." Walter nodded, but slowly, like he was still weighing the consequences of being told something concrete. "I'm not scared of bad news," he said. "I'm scared of no news." Virex tilted its head. "That is a paradox." "Yeah, well, humans are a little paradoxical." Later that cycle, just before the lights dimmed for rest period, Virex received a message from the diagnostic center. Walter had gone in alone, without prompting. The preliminary scans were inconclusive, but they'd scheduled a more detailed motor coordination mapping for the following day. Virex didn't mention it when they met at the Aquatic Center that afternoon. Walter was already waist-deep in the pool, wearing slightly oversized Academy-issued swim shorts and looking unsure of what to do with his arms. "They feel too light," he said as Virex approached the edge, "like my body forgot how to weigh itself without gravity. You must recalibrate your proprioception. Aquatic environments alter force feedback." Walter raised an eyebrow. "You sound like the instructor." "I reviewed the hydrodynamics module last night. Of the 8 students in the pool, Walter was the only human. The others a mix of Encali, Vornari, and one stoic, gill-faced Etrian, moved through the water with a fluidity Walter lacked. He tried a basic backstroke and immediately veered into the lane divider. One of the Vornari clicked in amusement, its dorsal fins flickering. Walter surfaced, coughing. "Graceful as a cinder block." "Your approach lacked symmetry," Virex observed. "Try engaging your anterior deltoids more evenly." Walter attempted a few more strokes. He managed a full length without hitting anything, but his kick was erratic and his breathing labored. When he climbed out of the pool, water streaming from his hair and eyes red from the chlorine, he looked exhausted and faintly triumphant. "I didn't drown," he said. "You exceeded expectation." Walter flopped onto a towel and stared at the ceiling. "I think I like it. The water makes me feel less breakable. That is an encouraging perception. Beat it, but I'm going to be sore tomorrow. I will adjust your harness to accommodate aquatic strain." The next morning, Walter limped into class with a slight crick in his neck. Virex said nothing but attached a thermogel patch to his shoulder during mid-lecture. A few days later, Walter sat in the diagnostics lab, his arms and legs dotted with motion-tracking nodes. A humanoid technician adjusted the calibration device while a pair of analytical drones floated nearby. Virex stood by the wall, silent. Walter kept glancing at the monitor, watching the skeletal model of himself mimic his movements with a half-second delay. "Feels like a weird video game," he said. "You are participating in a full-body neuromechanical assessment. It is not recreational." The technician raised a hand. "Begin standard gait sequence." Walter walked back and forth across the padded floor, then repeated the action with eyes closed. He stumbled once, corrected, and kept going. After 2 hours of balance tests, reach assessments, and memory coordination drills, Walter sat on the exam table, wiping sweat from his temple. "Any verdict?" he asked. The technician replied without looking up. "Data will be analyzed overnight. Results available in one rotation." Walter nodded. "Cool. I'll just try not to crash into anything until then." The next day was uneventful. Walter attended classes, avoided obstacles, and even managed to pass a full tray of food across a busy cafeteria without incident. Virex observed discreetly, noting improvements in his spatial awareness and foot placement. When the results came in, they met in a quiet conference area behind the medical wing. The attending specialist, a gray-furred Malari named Zun, greeted them with a stiff nod. "The scans indicate minor dyspraxia," Zun said without preamble. "Developmental in origin. It affects motor planning and coordination. Not degenerative, not terminal, but persistent." Walter exhaled. "So I'm not just clumsy?" "You have a neurological condition affecting balance, spatial judgment, and fine motor sequencing. It is manageable." "Is there a cure?" "There is adaptation." Walter looked at Virex. "I guess it's official. I'm wired different. You are configured uniquely. That is not objectionable." Zun provided a set of exercises and recommended occupational therapy sessions. Walter accepted the packet without argument. That evening, they returned to the hydroponic atrium. The lighting was low, casting long shadows across the nutrient tanks. Walter sat on the same bench as before, holding the diagnostic report in one hand. "You know the weirdest part?" he said. Virex waited. "I don't feel bad. I thought I would, but now it makes sense why I bounce off door frames, why I always drop keys, why it takes me 3 tries to tie my shoes evenly. You have context." "Yeah, and a plan." Virex leaned forward slightly. "I will assist with implementation." Walter smiled, more genuinely this time. "I know." The midday light filtering through the Academy's atrium was muted by the misting system, casting a soft halo around the upper levels of the structure. Walter sat on a low bench just beneath a curved panel of smart glass, towel draped loosely around his neck, hair still damp from the hydrotherapy session. His ankle, though no longer wrapped, bore the faint outline of a support ring that had been removed earlier that morning. The stiffness was fading, but he moved with the cautious precision of someone who had begun measuring every step. Across from him, Virex was adjusting the elastic band of a small wrist module, its digits working with mechanical efficiency. It hadn't looked up in several minutes, but Walter didn't mind. They had settled into a rhythm where silence was neither strained nor expected. "I tried that cross-pattern walking thing Dr. Zunn showed me," Walter said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know, touching right elbow to left knee and all that. Nearly fell into the pool filter." Virex paused. "You attempted it while wet." "I was drying off, figured I'd multitask." Walter shrugged. "Didn't go great. You could have concussed yourself on the edge of the filtration unit." "Yeah, I gathered that right around the time I hit the tile with both hands." Virex resumed working on the wrist module. "I have adjusted the harness algorithm to account for lateral instability during rotational movements. It will deploy micro-stabilizers if your balance shifts beyond a 6-degree threshold." Walter leaned back against the bench. "You know, when I signed up for this exchange program, I thought I'd be the one studying aliens, not being studied by them." Virex sat down across from him, folding its limbs with a practiced grace. "You have provided extensive data, more than any of your fellow humans. Your file has been flagged as a case study in cross-species resilience analysis." "Well, that's flattering. I think you are an anomaly in both frequency of physical incidents and rate of psychological recovery. The latter is of particular interest." Walter frowned. "Psychological recovery? You consistently downplay your injuries. You express amusement rather than distress. You resume physical activity shortly after trauma. These are not standard responses." Walter looked down at his hands. "Yeah, well, if I stopped every time I got hurt, I'd never get anything done. That is not a sustainable strategy." "I'm aware." Virex observed him for a moment. "May I ask a question unrelated to your medical status?" Walter nodded. "Shoot." "Why do your people engage in activities that increase injury probability, such as contact sports or recreational climbing, while possessing such fragile tissue structures?" Walter laughed through his nose. "Because it's fun." Virex didn't blink. "Pain is not enjoyable." "No, but the thrill kind of is. There's something satisfying about doing something risky and coming out the other side okay, or mostly okay." "That logic appears flawed." Walter tucked the towel behind his neck. "You're not wrong, but it's part of how we're wired. I think we like proving we can take a hit and keep going." Virex considered that, then slowly tapped a command on its wrist pad. "That aligns with several behavioral studies I reviewed last cycle. Humans often equate perseverance with identity." Walter smiled faintly. "Yeah, probably too much. But I guess it's how we cope." There was a chime from Virex's pad. It held the screen out toward Walter. "Your next physical therapy session is scheduled to begin in 8 minutes. The instructor has noted your recent improvement." Walter stood, brushing off his pants. "Let's see if I can get through it without adding a new bruise to the collection." "You have not sustained visible contusions in the past 4 days." "Don't jinx it." They walked together to the rehabilitation wing, bypassing a group of Etrian students engaged in a slow-motion martial drill. One of them raised a webbed hand in greeting. Walter waved back, nearly knocking his elbow against a metal conduit. He caught himself just in time. "See, progress," he said. "Marginal," Virex replied, though its tone had softened. Inside the rehab room, the instructor, a tall violet-hued Relalian named Thex, waited by a mat lined with balance modules. Walter stepped onto the first pad, wobbling briefly before finding his footing. The session began with low-impact pacing exercises, followed by resistance band stretches and controlled turns. Virex stood just outside the range of motion, monitoring the data feed from Walter's harness. As Walter moved from the third to the fourth station, his foot caught slightly on the edge of a traction plate. He stumbled forward, but caught himself with a knee bend that, while inelegant, prevented a fall. Thex raised an eyebrow, Rejay. "You corrected your own balance. That is a first." Walter grinned, catching his breath. "I'll take that as a win." Your proprioceptive response time has improved 28% since your initial scan, Virex added. Walter wiped his forehead with the towel. No wonder I'm tired all the time. Thex handed him a hydration capsule. Muscle adaptation requires rest as much as repetition. You should consider spacing your sessions. I'll space them after I stop tripping over my own shadow. Literal shadows cannot cause physical obstruction, Virex noted. It's a figure of speech. Thex made a quiet clicking sound that might have been amusement. I believe you are ready to begin the motion stability phase next week, with supervision. Walter gave a mock salute. Looking forward to it. After the session, they returned to the dorm level. Walter moved more easily now, still cautious, but no longer tense with every step. In the common room, several students were gathered around a projection board, watching a replay of an interspecies hover disc match. The game was fast, chaotic, and clearly dangerous. Walter paused. That's the one where they launched themselves from rotating platforms, right? Makari's student nodded, antennae bobbing. 2 concussions and a dislocated shoulder last match. Spectacular. Virex turned slowly to Walter. No, I didn't say anything. You were considering participating? I wasn't. You were like... Walter grinned. Maybe next semester. Virex made a low humming sound. My calculations predict a minimum of 3 injuries should you attempt it. Then I'll beat the odds. You are the odds. Walter laughed and dropped onto the couch beside the projection board. His legs were sore, his shoulders ached, but for the first time since arriving, he didn't feel like he was dragging his body through a world built for something sturdier. The following morning, he received a notice from the Academy's Interspecies Acclimation Committee. His file had been updated to include a customized support plan, noting his diagnosis, therapy progress, and the presence of an assigned peer assistant, listed simply as Virex, voluntary. He showed the message to Virex during lunch. They made you my official handler. I am not a handler. You are not a hazardous specimen. Well, that's debatable. Virex tapped the screen. I accepted the designation. It grants me override access to scheduling and environmental controls relevant to your safety. Walter raised an eyebrow. You're going to start locking doors behind me, aren't you? If required. He laughed and bit into a nutrient bar. You know, I think I'm actually going to get through this place in one piece, or close enough. Virex nodded once. That is acceptable. Walter leaned back in his chair, looking around the bustling cafeteria. The noise, the scent of 20 different meals, the overlapping languages. It was chaos, but the kind he could live in. He tapped his wrapped ankle with the toe of his other shoe. Hey, Virex? Yes. Thanks. For not treating me like I'm broken. You are not broken, Virex said without hesitation. Merely configured with unconventional tolerances. Walter raised his drink. I'll take it. And for the rest of the meal, they sat without further analysis, surrounded by the churn of academy life, one human still bruised around the edges, but finally steady.